Hi everyone, we are more than halfway done Unit 1 of Functions. Today we're going to do Lesson 1.5, Inverse Relations. I'll start out by the definition. An inverse relation is when the independent variable and the dependent variable are switched. So you switch x and y, resulting in a function that equals to x rather than f of x. The symbol that is shown on the slide here is used to describe the inverse function. So for example, in the original function, if a went to 3, b went to 1, c went to 3, c went to 2, the inverse function would be a went to b, 2 went to c, and 3 went to a. So if we look at the two weird looking shapes here, if x went to y by the original function, that means y went to x by the inverse function. Steps for finding inverse functions. If we're given a formula for a function f of x, how do we find the formula for the inverse function? Step 1, we have to write out the formula for the function y equals to f of x, and that would be the original function. Step 2, if possible, solve the equation for x in terms of y. And then we have to interchange the variable x and y. So y becomes x and x becomes y. So that the inverse function of x, we end up with a function y equals to the inverse of the function. Let's look at example 1. Find the inverse when the function equals to x squared. So we have to start out by writing the original equation of y equals to x squared. Then we'll try to isolate x, so we have to write a function equals to x. So what we do is we square root both sides. That will let us cancel out the power that's on top of x. So then we end up with the equation of square root of y equals to x. And that's our final answer. The inverse function is square root of y. Let's look at a more complicated example. So find the inverse of the function when f of x equals to 2x plus 8 all to the power of 3. So before we approach this question, we have to think of a plan, what we want to accomplish. The plan for this is we must solve the equation for x instead of y. Once again, we start out by writing the original function. And then what we do is we power both sides by 1 over 3. Then we minus 8 and divide by 2 on both sides of the equation, and that will isolate x. That would be our final answer for the inverse function. Example 3. Finding the inverse function graphically for the equation f of x equals to x squared. So before we do this question, we have to know what x squared looks like as a graph. And it's shown here in the color blue. What we have to know next is what does the graph of y equals to x looks like, and it's shown here on its color red. What we do next is very simple. We think of this y equals to x line as a mirror in which we reflect whatever is on one side to the other side. So the dotted line here will be our final answer for the graph of the inverse function. So that's the end of this video. So don't forget to do your assignment and activity, upload them to your teacher to be marked.